a record collector.
Yeah.
He was known as like a top tier record collector throughout the hip hop industry. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, but we'll get into it, is not producers know, and you know this now as a producer. When you start getting deep into the crates, it opens up your knowledge of music.
Right.
You start hearing records that you never would have heard otherwise.
And never would have wanted to hear. You wouldn't even have went to, to the world section in the record store.
Right. You'd have walked right past it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially like if you grew up on soul or something like that.
Yeah.
You would walk right past the rock section.
Yeah.
The world section, the dance, disco.
Yep.
You would ignore all of those records. But Biz was like an avid collector. Like there's a Biz quote. He says, "I collect a lot of things, and some things I like to be close to me." He had a lot of like his record collection. I've heard stories about him with the was it the Beanie Babies or some weird little toy. He collected toys. He collected obviously vinyl. I talked to Mr. Dibbs once. Dibbs was telling me stories about Biz Markie having, because him and Biz were friends. They had a friendship, and Biz, I guess, had like a whole house of records. He had 2 cribs at one point. One just was all records. All records, man. So it not only makes you a fan of the music that you're collecting, but it also widens your palette. And if you're an artist, then it translates into the type of music you make, because now you're drawing from a whole lot of different inspirations, And when you look at Biz Markie's music that he created, what I find to be wild is that this dude was one of the dopest, known as one of the most prolific record collectors, but he wasn't known as a producer.
Right.
And in that era of hip hop, Marley Marl produced all his records, but in that era of hip hop, the production was always kind of hazy, right? Like the definition of what a producer is different now.
Oh, very different.
There's all kind of stories about guys not producing something, but bringing the records, being involved in the process. The actual engineers were the only ones who knew how to use a lot of that equipment, because it wasn't like these guys had their own studios for the most part. So a lot of these guys would go to bigger studios, and the bigger studios had a guy sitting there who knew how to work the sampler. So they would bring their records and the shit that they wanted to sample, and then the engineer would help them hook it up.
Right.
But a lot of guys during that era did not necessarily get their props as producers. And I think Biz is probably one of those guys, because there's no way you can have the record collection that he had and not be bringing some of those records to the table for your albums.
Yeah, and he didn't even get recognized as a DJ till later in life.
True. So true.
He didn't start spinning until after his music career was pretty much, coming to an end. Because I think he put his last record out in 2003.
Yeah.
I want to say. But then he started getting known, and getting booked as a DJ.
Yeah.
Really heavy.
Yeah.
And he was a dope DJ too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that a lot of that, he was playing 45 sets. And when you look at that, you can't play no 45 sets if you don't know a lot about records.
Oh yeah, because that's one song, bro. Like that's one joint. So you gotta know the BPM. Yeah. You gotta know, you gotta know your collection.
And they not cheap.
Nah, not good ones.
No, yeah, spinning 45s is not a cheap endeavor for DJs. And you typically, the guys you see who play all 45 sets are people who are avid record collectors.
Right.
Anybody can DJ, but guys who play 45 sets are typically avid collectors.
Yeah.
So what you see, and I think that had a profound impact on the kind of music Biz made and what he sampled. One thing you notice from Biz is that he wasn't a guy who sampled a lot of records that other people were sampling.
Right.
You had guys who were all sampling Nautilus, Funky Drummer. You know what I mean? Like all the staples of that era. There were a lot of samples that were getting passed around and common breaks, but you never really heard that on Biz Markie's records. And you look at later in his career when he started making the songs where he would kind of, it would be somebody singing one thing and he would kind of flip it and bounce it to his own thing.
Mm-hmm.
None of those are records that we would have found out about if it wasn't for him. I wouldn't have known about the song, the "You Got What I Need" song, if it wasn't for Biz Markie.
Right.
Singing it and flipping it, you know. And so, you know, I don't know if you remember, but Cryptic made a post on his Instagram when Biz died, where he was playing the original sample that Biz re-sang for one of his songs. It was like a local electronic shop. Do you remember that?
Nah.
Oh yeah, you got to check it out. It's on Cryptic's Instagram. It's like this 80s ad for this electronics store called Nobody Beats the Wiz.
Oh, crazy.
And the store's called The Wiz. It was a chain of electronic stores in an upstate New York area. And there's just the record was like, nobody beats the Wiz. Nobody beats the Wiz. Nobody beats the Wiz. Nobody beats the Wiz.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And I wouldn't have known it if Cryptic didn't post it, you know, a few weeks ago. And I was like, holy shit, I never knew that's what that was. I always wondered, like, how'd he come up with this shit, you know? And they basically took this local commercial, flipped it into this Nobody Beats the Biz shit. And it's so dope. But he was just a creative sampler, man.
Yeah.
Creative. And you think, and even if you're looking at taking what somebody did in a hook and flipping it into But You Say Just a Friend and all the songs he had that were kind of like that, no one was doing it before him.
Oh no, nobody was doing it. Because everything that he did, like you said in the beginning, like he was undoubtedly himself.
Yeah.
And there was nobody that sounded like Biz, nobody that did the type of music that Biz did. And, you know, it just shined through, you know, in all his music.
Yeah, man. And then there's something else I want to talk about here too, because like, you know, one of the things that we have to also look at when we evaluate Biz's career is like, they came along when sampling laws were not even a thing.
Right.
Sampling was a brand new technology, you know, and so what they were doing, it hadn't fully been regulated yet. You know, they were walking some fine lines. And Biz Markie, in addition to being known as one of the most, you know, avid record collectors and collectors in hip hop, is also known as the guy who's responsible for sampling laws being installed in hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Being created. Special laws were created because of what they were doing. And there's a excerpt I'm going to read here from an NPR article where it's talking about like this thing. And it says, it's about Biz Markie. And it says, when sampling technology and practices became hip hop's musical blueprint in the late 80s, the business and legal rules were a thoroughly gray area. Since the techniques created digital copies of source material, copyright holders could argue that unauthorized sampling violated their intellectual property. Those doing the sampling could argue they were repurposing fragments of recorded music to create something entirely new. Up until 1991, disputes around those arguments carried more weight. About whose argument carried more weight tended to be settled out of court. This is where Biz comes back in. In 1991, O'Sullivan sued Markie over the Alone Again sample. This case came hot on the heels of a $1.7 million settlement between the members of the 60s rock group The Turtles and the rap group De La Soul, all stemming from a few seconds of a Turtles song sampled by De La. With the O'Sullivan Markie case, one complication was that Markie and his label did initially try to clear the sample through O'Sullivan, but when the singer-songwriter declined to do so, the label released the song anyway. This set up the eventual legal showdown, which, unlike the previous cases, didn't get settled out of court, but instead ended up being decided by Judge Kevin Duffy in a far-reaching decision for future sampling practices. Duffy found Biz Markie guilty of infringing on O'Sullivan's copyright, ordered the rapper to pay $250,000 in damages, barred Markie's label, Warner Brothers, from continuing to sell either single or album, and, most astoundingly, referred the matter to criminal court on the grounds that Markie was liable for theft. The rapper was never charged. Duffy's decision permanently altered the landscape of sampling, not so much curtailing it. Sampling is still popular after all, but changing the creative and business practices around it.
Wow.
Deep, right?
Wow. It's crazy. I didn't know that it was Biz.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst for the sample laws. I didn't know that.
Yeah, man. Yep, it was Biz. And one of the complications of this is like if you go to Spotify right now and look for Biz's catalog, a lot of it's not on streaming sites.
Yeah, none of the old stuff.
Yeah, same thing for De La Soul.
Yep.
Isn't it wild that the two groups who were at the pioneer, you know what I'm saying, for all of the sample clearance stuff, their catalogs have been kind of wiped out of the digital space to where you can't even listen to their music anymore?
Yeah.
It's kind of fucked up. Like you gotta have physical copies. There's best of Biz Markie songs out there. And his biggest hits have been allowed to be up there. Same for De La, but a lot of their old catalog, due to this stuff, it sucks that they couldn't work out nothing 20, 30 years later for people to just enjoy the songs and just work out something equitable,
Yeah.
But yeah, creative sampling, Biz Markie was at the forefront of that. And because he was, his catalog has some stuff's there, some stuff's not. But that's one of the things that actually made him successful.